hopefully very sunny Tuesday wherever you are. I think it's very much the last of the summer that we're clinging on to at the moment, before I think the cold weather sets back in. As you can probably tell, I'm joined by the brilliant Gillian today, for this lunchtime webinar. Gillian, I was thinking, has it been a year since we last did a webinar together? It must be nearly a year now, which is...
It was last year, actually. About this time last year, actually, was the last time we did one of these. Yeah. So
It's
really looking forward to being here today and talking about the topic. It kind of excites me, so I hope it excites everybody else too.
I mean, I can't believe how quickly time is going as well. I actually went to a meeting this morning and I had to use the C word, the Christmas word. So it's very much getting to that time of year as well. So whilst we wait for a couple of people to join us, we'd love for you to sort of say hello to us. So if you go down into your bottom screen, please do say hello. We'd love to hear sort of where you are joining us from. Throughout sort of the Gillian's very kind of going to be doing a presentation, and I'll touch upon that in a second in regards to the topic, because it is a very interesting topic. But we'll do a Q&A question, a Q&A session at the end. So please do pop down any questions that you might have throughout, and then I will obviously pass these questions over to Gillian, who will be there to answer them. So looks like we've got people joining us from all over, which is really exciting. So we've had loads of hellos. We've got those from London. We have someone in Vienna, from South Africa. So really sort of really nice globe. Finland, Helsinki. And probably not having such a nice weather compared to us over here, and Argentina as well. So brilliant. Thank you so much for joining us. So brief introduction in regards to you are Gillian. So for those who haven't met Gillian, so she is an acclaimed transformational coach, and you're actually one of the top 3 coaches worldwide, which is highly impressive. Obviously I won't give your age away too much, but I understand you've been doing this with over sort of 2 decades. Correct. 2 decades of doing this. I know for me personally, I know that you've supported me, and you've obviously supported a wide number of people as well, from an executive coaching element as well. So very welcome to you, Gillian. And for those who don't know me, my name is Elspeth Shaw. I work at CNC Search, and I sort of partner on HR, people and talent positions, but I have quite a heavy leadership role as well. So I wouldn't be doing my job if you are looking for any support on a recruitment perspective. Please do reach out to myself, because I'd be more than happy to support you. And again, from a coaching element, I'll share Gillian's details afterwards, but she will very much be on hand to support with any sort of coaching aspects as well. Now, bringing us onto our hot topic of today. So the subject is Gen Z, Millennials and Beyond, a guide to getting to know the best from your teams. And interestingly, I actually had an email from McKinsey today, which very much coincided with our webinar today. And the topic, or I should say the strapline, was members of Gen Z and mental health. And interestingly, although it was based on the States and sort of their figures, I think it very much mirrors that to what we're experiencing over here as well. But it's looking at how Gen Zs have said that they're experiencing the most stress, loneliness and anxiety compared to other generations. And moving forward, we're now at this time where we have so many different generations. I think we have now up to 5 generations collaborating in a workplace. So it's really important, more than ever, to sort of really understand what the motivations are for that, and how for us as leaders, or sort of in managerial leadership roles, can really support from that element as well. So Gillian, over to you.
Thank you, everybody, and really nice to be here. It's wonderful to see so many people on the webinar. So thank you so much. I'm going to share my screen with you, and I'm going to talk through just a short presentation, and then we can open it up for Q&A as we go through. So just give me a moment just to get me to share my screen. Bear with me a second. The right slide. Here we go. All right, so hopefully you can see that. I'm assuming you can. It looks like you can from my end. But if you can't, can somebody just or would somebody just give me the nod just to say, yes, you can see it in the chat box? I'm sure you'll be able to say that. Gotcha. Okay, perfect. Thank you very much, everybody. All right. So as Elspeth has said, if there's any questions, pop them in the chat box. She's going to be collecting them. If we need to do a pause and do a check-in throughout, we can ask as we go. But really want this to be as informative as as possible for you. So look, as Elspeth said, there's reports coming out left, right, and centre, from Gallup to McKinsey's to Deloitte. This is a hot topic. It is the biggest hot topic at this moment from an organizational perspective, because as Elspeth has said, we have got so many different generations all working together in one place, that it is not necessarily always easy as a leader or as a manager to establish the best approach to take with each of those individuals that you might have within your team. So as we've called this title of this webinar, Gen Z, Millennials and Beyond, which includes all generations really, but we will be focusing a little bit more on the Gen Z as we go through. So welcome. So I want to talk to you a little bit about the generations and what the generations are looking for and needing for from an employer, and then how to lead and manage for success, taking a coaching approach to leading and managing people, and how we can become a three-dimensional leader manager so that we're encompassing the needs and the wants and the desires of those of your teams. And as we said, we'll have some Q&A at the end. All right, so let's just look at the generations. This is a bit of a backdrop. You might be all familiar with this already, just in terms of the different generations, but we have baby boomers, okay? So baby boomers, 1946 to 1964. My dad, for example, would be classed as a baby boomer, born around either just after the war or during the war, Second World War in the UK, and then obviously up to 1964. Then you have Gen X, which is what I sit in, I'm afraid. I was born in 1972, so we have 1965 to 1979. And then we have what's known as the older millennials, 1980 to 1988, and then we have young millennials and Gen Z, which is 1989 to 2010. So you might find within your workplace that you have everybody, and certainly in the workplaces that I work with as a coach and as a leadership development expert, and especially helping people understand the concept of coaching their organization, we find that we're dealing with such a mixed bag of different age ranges and different generations. And each generation has qualities, has motivations, has drivers, has aspirations, all coming from a different place. And I suppose as a leader, as a manager, it's quite important actually that you need to understand where each individual is coming from, what motivates them, what makes them tick, what's going to get them out of bed of a morning to really be successful in the work that they do for you and the organization. So let's look at some. So it's a bit of a kind of a busy slide, but I wanted to try and get it all on one slide, and we can share these slides with you afterwards. But baby boomers, okay. We know that they literally represent the boom in the birth rate between 1946 and 1964. Hence, they've been called boomers. Now, came to an age, as it says here, during a time of massive social change. So we had civil rights movement, we had the Cold War, we had the Vietnam War, we had counterculture of the 1960s, and baby boomers were known and still are known for their ethical workplace approach and their work style. So very strong, hard work ethic. And in a sense, they've had a huge influence on how we lead and how we manage our organizations today. Baby boomers continue to impact industries, boards, and society. And although baby boomers might be coming to the time where they're moving towards retiring or thinking about retirement, they will still have an influence on industry and organizations because of the way that they have in terms of their hard work ethic and their relationship that they have with work. So you might see that from some of the older generations that you might be working with in your organization. So let's look at Gen X. This is where I sit, and I don't know if anybody else sits within this category, but obviously born up to 1976. And again, there's lots of things happening when we were coming, these Gen X kind of characteristics were all coming to play because there was so much change going on. Divorce rates in the US were an all-time high. Both parents working, would move from having the female or the mum stay at home. And obviously technology changed. We had lots of things like Atari, the Walkman, you know, kind of that was amazing. I had one of those, it's fantastic. And then we had technology TV, such as MTV, so music television. And we were so influenced by these cool movies like The Breakfast Club. I am sure I'm at age now, but it was one of my favorites. But all these kind of coming of age movies, and those are the kind of the first kind of pioneers of these types of coming of age movies, and we're all very influenced by that. Alongside that, in the US particularly, we had obviously the AIDS epidemic, crack epidemic, we had the Iran stuff, energy crisis, and so there's lots of things influencing how we were experienced in the world that then has obviously influenced how we show up in the workplace. Now, we obviously have come from a generation of I speak for myself and my parents, where hard work was absolutely drilled in. You only get promoted if you work hard, you go the extra mile, you know, you're seen as getting your head down, you don't kind of put your head above the parapet, but you work and you will be rewarded for your work ethic. And that has been something from a values perspective that has been pushed down on me over the years, which has made me work very hard in my career and in my business, which has had great success and rewards, but sometimes can also have an impact on that emotional well-being or that quality of life that the Gen Zs are kind of really looking for. But what happens, so from a Gen X perspective, we have been proven to be excellent leaders and, you know, very influential, because that hard work ethic has led us to wanting to progress, wanting to be better or get ahead of where perhaps our parents were. And that was also instilled from a Gen X characteristic, was that you need to do better, or we want you to do better than what we've done in terms of the parents. So like my parents, for example, would be a prime example. But I suppose it's been researched that Gen X basically is the glue that holds everything together with many workforces. And they are at the moment in this life stage. So most people in Gen X will be coming towards their certainly towards their 50s, but they will be moving into senior leadership roles, which will continue, and they will continue to grow and develop in those roles as they progress, assuming that they've got the right characteristics, the right approach to leading and managing a really multi-dimensional workforce moving forward. Okay. So let's look at millennials, so known as Gen Y, echo boomers, digital natives, all born from 77 up to 1995. But you also might be kind of sitting between that cusp, which is I didn't know about this until I did my research, but a cusper, which is obviously sitting just between millennials and Gen X, which might be you. Between 1977 and 1980, you might have been born. Now, millennials came of age during the time of rapid technical change. So obviously mobile phones, internet, email, everything went more digital. And as we know, we're progressing even more with AI and a range of other different things. But millennials were the first adopters to new technology and rapid technology, meaning that, you know, the technology was growing way more quicker than we could most probably understand as humans. Now, there are a few other key influences here. We had obviously the year 2000, which was a big, so YK2, which is a big thing for those that remember that or were around for that. We had the terrible attacks on September 11th in New York and around the globe. We had Facebook, was the birth of Facebook. And social media came to fruition in 2004. And then we've had the Great Recession, which actually my business and I went through in 2008 to 2010. And it was pretty hard going. And when you run a business going through something like that. So I've experienced that, but also the millennials were growing up through that experience. Millennials at the moment are the largest generation in the workforce in the global marketplace. And are coming now into, we would say, wealth accumulation. So meaning that they're got enough money now to have their home, you know, they've got their mortgage, they've got their nice cars. They're now thinking maybe now's the time to kind of settle down and start to have families. So they're they've got quite a good capital and are quite wealthy in many ways. But yet they still have challenges within the workplace, which we're going to come along to a little bit later. And then we have Gen Z. So again, this is the fastest and emerging generation of employees, consumers, and trend setters. And I quite like the idea of trendsetters and consumers, because that's what Gen Z is renowned for. You will notice that Gen Zs, I have a son who's a Gen Z, is constantly like this or constantly like this over their phone. And so you'll notice that they are quick to learn, they adapt very, very quickly. And they are, I suppose, needing and wanting something different than what we've had before. And certainly from my generation, wanting very, very different things. So things that are happening, obviously AI technology is growing and evolving and changing, but also the worldview is changing. So we have YouTube for hosting, watching videos on demand whenever you want. We've had Amazon, smartphones, especially the iPhone, and how that's progressed. We have obviously Barack Obama, Uber. We've got now, obviously, we've come out of the EU in the UK, and we have a legion of new influencer celebrities fueled by social media. So there is a lot happening that Gen Z are involved in. And there is a constant need to be aware of what's happening out there on social media and other trends. And so they're very conscious of the trends, what's shaping the worldview, what's happening in the world, but also what's happening within their own social circle, whether that be virtual or they're in person. Now, obviously, alongside all of this as well, as Gen Zs have been growing up, we've also had pandemic and a range of other challenges that the pandemic has given us. So it's just a little bit of background just to share some of the things. But let's look at what these generations are looking for, because I think as a leader and as a manager of people, it is really important to understand what are your people needing from an organization, from an employer, but more importantly, from you as their leader and as their manager. So go straight back to baby boomers and Gen X. They're quite, as you can see, they're in fact, they share the same values around what they're looking for. They're looking for an organization where leadership is ethical. They're looking for an organization that cares about their employee well-being, and they are looking at an organization's financial stability. Now, that was kind of, when we were kind of looking for jobs, and, we would go for organizations that had that good track record. So the larger companies that had good track record in that financial stability. But come when the older millennials, so 1980, 1988, still well-being. And as you notice, well-being now is at the top of the list. And again, very similar to Gen Z, that these generations are looking for people to take an active interest in how they're feeling, their emotional health, their mental health, and also their physical health, and maybe even spiritual health as a whole, like the 4 cornerstones of health and well-being. I would say we need to be looking at and engaging in conversations with the older millennials, but certainly the young millennials and Gen Z in particular. They are very keen about making sure, certainly from a millennial perspective, that the organization's leadership is ethical and the organization's leadership is open and transparent. But when we look at Gen Z in particular, they're now keen around organizations' leadership being open and transparent, and having an organization that is diverse and inclusive of all people. So it has evolved quite significantly, the difference between the millennials and the Gen Zs. And you can see that playing out and coming through now, in rippling all the way through many organizations around diversity, equality, inclusiveness, but also the fact that they're looking for a different conversation with their leaders, with their managers, with the organizations, and they want a different relationship with the organization that they work for. Whereas baby boomers would have a job for life, Gen Zs are looking for something that is going to give them the next opportunity to grow, develop, and learn. So they're not looking for a job for life, they're looking for different things. So how do we work together? So some of the things from the research, I've done lots of interviews with all generational ages around how they like to work best and what's important to them. And so when we think about working across generations, first of all, because that's most of what our workforce is doing, you will be noticing that what we want to do as a leader, as a manager, is to start accepting and appreciating the different approaches to work. So actually recognizing, and maybe I'm teaching you to suck eggs, but certainly recognizing that somebody from the baby boomer age will still have something of great value to contribute in terms of knowledge and experience, but also bringing in a Gen Z, for example, where new ideas can be worked around on maybe some traditional ways of thinking, can advance kind of practices within the workplace. And so we're wanting to see where the strengths best lie between our workforce and our teams. So accept and appreciate that different approaches to work will work. There is no right or wrong. It is just different approaches. And it's very easy to get caught up in going with the latest trend or the latest kind of, the thing that you think you should be doing as a leader, as a manager, rather than actually looking at that diversity and taking a step back and actually really evaluating the importance of that diversity and those different approaches. And based upon knowledge and experience, but also, background and all sorts of different things we can include into that. I think it's important to actually educate the team about multi-generational team working, the pros and the cons, and how that can work best for your team. Because every team will have its own dynamic, its own culture, its own kind of system and way of working. But what we want to do is establish some of those high-performing team concepts, such as establishing respect, listening to each other, and working towards the same common goal. Now, what that requires, though, is the ego to be moved completely out of the way from all generations, because in each generational grouping or cohort, if that's what you want to call it, the ego will always be present. And we want to make sure that we're trying to move the ego to one side so we can really, truly accept and appreciate each and every one of the team. We want to focus on the big picture, so how each team member can contribute to company goals, success, but also how we can have more of a meaningful recognition and appreciation, but also more of a meaningful conversation. Meaning that we want to be able to be more receptive, more transparent, more open, meaning that we again are open to learn from one another. We can fight the age biases and the stereotypes, and we can offer flexible solutions to diverse needs. And therefore, but what we don't want to do is also overlook any of the similarities, the common values, because that's also what can build the trust within a cohesive team. So let's look at the landscape at the moment within an organization. And it's very different, organizations will have different challenges, but this is just more generically about what's been fed back over the research that I've been doing, but also the organizations that I work with. And we would say that the biggest challenge is multi-generational teams in terms of that diversity and the appreciation and acceptance of where people are at, one within their career, their experience, and what they can bring to the team. The diversity, awareness, and demand for equality is always going to be a challenge. It'll be something that will be a work in progress, I believe, for most organizations as they move forward and progress. Hybrid working is new territory for most. Global complexities, there's so much happening in the world. There's all sorts of things going on with now 2 wars that are taking place. We've got just the global landscape in terms of the commercial aspects of what's happening in the world, and we're becoming more and more complex. We have less people doing more work. We've got overwhelm, we've got burnout. And the more awareness that we have now around well-being, there is a bigger demand for well-being at work, and that's on the rise significantly. We've got mental health that is also bringing much more awareness to individuals. And if organizations and teams are not having these conversations, then we are really missing out on a valuable, meaningful discussion that does need to take place in the workplace. We've got lots of changes around leadership and people management, because we have leaders who are multi-generational. And so therefore, again, different approaches and different styles means that we need to learn to adopt and try different ways of leading and managing our people than what we thought we used to do if we were baby boomers or my generation. And then we've got the challenge. And I don't want to say that millennials or Gen Zs are challenging. They have just a different outlook to life that the other 2 generations don't have, which means that there has to be adaptability. But I don't believe that it just has to be the adaptability for the older generations. I think there needs to be a common language created and a common agreement between all generations that if we are working in multi-generational organizations, then how do we work best together? And I'm not quite sure how much of these conversations are actually really truly taking place in a lot of the organizations I work with. So let's look at the kind of the more newer generations around getting the best out of the millennials and the Gen Zs in your team. So in my team, but in your team. So the idea would be that, first of all, we have to understand the differences between both generations. We have to understand their individual needs. Because what's happening with the newer generations is that their needs are very important, as all of our needs are. But when we look at, for example, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if we can remember that, if anybody's familiar with that, Maslow many, many years ago came up with his hierarchy, which is that we need our kind of physiological needs, which is just we need to be able to breathe, we need to be able to have water, we need to be able to have our basic kind of food and shelter, kind of in terms of our basic needs. And then he moves up the rank. But where we're looking at for our Gen Zs and millennials is that really from that sense of belonging. So the rung up, which is belonging, self-esteem needs, and self-actualization. Now, Gen Zs and millennials are really wanting to stay within those top 3 layers of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And so that means that if we want to help them reach more of their potential, their self-actualization, which is what Gen Zs in particular are looking for, which is purpose-led, purpose-fueled careers, then we need to understand what motivates and drives them, what makes them excited about the world that they're living in, what gets them out of bed of a morning, and what's their purpose of coming to work and doing the work that they do. What is sitting behind all of that? We need to understand what interests will also, so what interests they have, that what they have will also help you guide them better. So where are they passionate? What do they feel they're drawn to? What is taking a strengths-based approach to delegation and work allocation can be a really good way to support both millennials, but more so Gen Zs in particular. Understand what do they need from you. As a manager, I've always done this because I've always been a coach, I suppose, for the last 20 years. But one of the questions I always ask my team members is actually, well, what do you need from me? How do you like to be led? How do you like to be managed? How do you want me to communicate with you? And how can I support you best? But in return, this is what I also need from you. And so there's a very open and transparent conversation that I have with all of my team members and have done ever since I've really had my organization. But the reality is that a lot of managers, a lot of leaders don't get into that because we're too busy focusing on the tasks. Now, tasks were great for my generation and for baby boomers. Tasks are not the same for Gen Zs. Gen Zs in particular have a very, very short mind span. So as you know, they're constantly flicking through videos, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok now, whatever it might be, social media as a whole. So their attention span is less than the earlier generations. There is nothing wrong with that. It's just the way that their brain has been trained due to the influences that they've had as they've been growing up. But it still will determine how successful that person can be at work. So we need to think then also about the environment that our Gen Zs are potentially working within. Are we in an open plan? Are they kind of hybrid working? When they do come into the office, where are we sitting people? Because also, again, just as research has proven, that with Gen Zs in particular, because the attention span is so short, that they need variety. They love multitasking, but we do know that multitasking actually doesn't lead to the achievement of results. It can just achieve to a lot more work and a lot more stress. And also they can get very easily distracted in an open plan office. So we need to start thinking about these things so that we can have a different conversation with them, so that we can help lead and manage them better. So I think the way to do this is to become a coach. That's what I think. I think if we can take a coaching approach to leading and managing the younger generations, coaching can work with all generations, but we're talking about the last 2 generations, the more recent generations, then it can make a big difference, because millennials and Gen Zs don't like being traditionally managed. They certainly don't want to be micromanaged. They don't want to be told what to do. They want to be given a question or given a project to think about and to find their own solution, which fits really beautifully within a self-directive approach that would happen in coaching. So I feel, and I've made this up, I don't know that even this exists, but I've made this up, becoming a three-dimensional leader based upon my research and experience. And what I mean by that is that within each of the relationships that we have with our millennials or Gen Zs or any team member, but we need to build trust. We need to think about how we consciously communicate to get the best out of that person and how we help them make meaning, which sits again very nicely with a coaching style conversation. I'm just looking at my clock to make sure I'm finding time. So how do we become, what does becoming a three-dimensional leader actually mean? So when we're thinking about building trust, it's also about building connection, because most of Gen Zs have virtual connections. And maybe in a workplace, they're going to continue to have virtual connections if they work from home or they do hybrid. But we want to build a deeper set of trust and connection with our team members, and especially the younger generations, because the research shows that they are lonely. They don't have the same connection that we might have had as a baby boomers or my generation in particular, because we're not doing things as face-to-face as much as we used to, and we don't communicate in the way that we used to, or Gen Zs don't communicate in the way that I might have communicated with my friends or colleagues many, many years ago when I entered the workforce. So we want to build trust of character, and this is about between you and them. And this set of principles actually is, I would say, comes and needs to be role modeled by you as the leader, as the manager, but can also be adopted by your team members. So we want to manage expectations. So what we say we're going to do, we do it. We're clear, we're transparent, and we are managing the expectations. So we're not surprising our team members. Yes, we might need to make some decisions. Yes, there might be challenges ahead or things, restructures or whatever might need to happen, but we want to be open. And so we can manage the expectations. So in coaching, we would call this placement, meaning, you know, like I did at the beginning and what Elspeth did at the beginning, at the end, we're going to have question and answers, you know, we're going to Q&A session. So we want to be really setting the scene by saying, okay, so by the time we finish this conversation, I'd like us to be clear on the outcomes of X, Y, Z. It sounds like I'm teaching you to suck eggs, but we forget to do it. And it's the most critical and crucial thing in building trust and deepening connection. So we want to manage the expectations. And with that, we want to establish boundaries, very clear about this is what you can expect from me, and I will listen and I will understand what I can expect from you. And so our boundaries are clear. So we both know how each other works. We both know what motivates, what excites us, what kind of gets us going, and how we want to contribute to the team. We want to be consistent in our approach, and we want to be keep our agreements, as said. So that's kind of trust of character. We then want to think about trust of communication, which is that we want to share information. We want to be open. Even if there's no information to share, we update. Nothing's changed on that decision at this moment in time, but I will come back to you. And so we are then looking at sharing information as and when. Yes, I'll be sending you the slides, that's fine. We also want to be honest and have more truthful conversations. I believe, and have been there myself when I first started in a leadership role, you know, let's be honest, we don't like having difficult conversations. We don't like being really honest with what's happening. Sometimes we like to kind of, you know, smooth over the edges. And we might want to give a softer piece of feedback rather than actually the feedback that we need to give. But as we're deepening and moving through these new generational kind of and new people coming into the workforce, honesty and telling the truth and upfrontness is most probably, again, quite critical to the success of holding and building that trust and connection. So we need to say it as it is. We can still be diplomatic, but what we do is we again, we would use placement in coaching. So we would say, I'd like to share an observation with you. Would that be okay? Or I noticed when you was in that meeting that you looked, you know, a little bit frustrated. Could we talk about what happened there for you? And let me help. Let's help understand what we can do, you know, for next time, so you don't have to experience that again. So there's something about being providing through the honesty, the observational feedback. Now, feedback is a word that's been around since the 60s. I mean, feedback's been around for years, obviously way before that. But feedback was this kind of where you would give them, I'm not going to swear, but that old kind of the poo sandwich, you know, you give them the good, you give them the bad, and then you finish off with the good. And that's certainly how I was led to believe that feedback, certainly that's how I was taught to deliver feedback, which is a really bad way, quite frankly, of giving feedback. What we want to do is drop the word feedback altogether and use the word observations. It might be semantics, but could I provide an observation sounds much better than can I give you some feedback? Because when feedback is brought to our attention, we shut down. We don't want to listen. And especially with a generation that has a very short attention span anyway, we don't want to be giving them the good, the bad, and the good again. We want to be giving them just what it is, which is an observation. And if we remove the good and the bad, then we use observational feed or provide observations as a way to develop, to learn, to grow. So we create that learning culture, which is so important for Gen Zs and Millennials in particular. So we provide observations rather than delivering feedback. And observation should be done in real time. It shouldn't be third party. It needs to be something that you've witnessed, so you've observed it, you've experienced it, you've heard it. You've been there. That's how you can give, and that's how you can also continue to build trust and that connection. We want to speak with good purpose. So we want to be clear in our intentions, clear in our messages. So we need to have an impact. We have to have impact as a leader, as a manager, meaning that we speak from our place of knowing, not second guessing from our head where we think we should be saying something because that's what we should be doing. We want to be speaking from that real, truer, more authentic space. And maintain confidentiality when required, which should go without saying. And then finally, trust of capability. We must acknowledge that everybody in your team has something of value to bring. You might not take everybody's idea on, you might not start, changing things radically on somebody else's thought process, but you do need to start acknowledging people's talents and encourage them to be self-directive, meaning accountable for making their own decisions and moving things forward. Because without that, we don't help them grow and we don't help them learn and evolve. And that's what we want to be doing. And especially with millennials, but also Gen Zs in particular, it is all about growth. It's all about how can I grow? How can I continue to learn? Give me experiences that are not going to leave me static. So we have to think about how we can optimize and utilize people's talents and even acknowledge them so that people feel that, again, that they're being seen and observed in the way that is going to help them grow and develop. That doesn't mean to say, by the way, that we don't have difficult conversations around performance and that we don't have, conversations around helping somebody if their conduct or behavior isn't appropriate. We still need to have all those conversations. But assuming we don't have any of those issues, then I would suggest that we try to work on the 3 C's on a regular basis to keep building that trust and connection. So that's the first bit. The second bit then is about conscious communication, which is listening. Now, in an organization, and most organizations are very overwhelmed, it's all about the do, getting it done now, delivering, making the results. You'll be familiar with that in lots of organizations. You don't have to be in a sales organization, it's any organization. So what we've forgotten to do, I believe, is listen deeply and ask questions. And this is where the coaching aspect comes in. There's so many different coaching models out there. There's the CLEAR model, which is by Peter Hawkins, and everybody's familiar with that. It's a good model to talk about and use as a framework. There's also the GROW model, which has been around for an awfully long time, or the T-GROW from Sir John Whitmore. But all of them include listening. All of them include asking questions. All models include seeking understanding. And we take a coaching approach. We can coach through managing if there's no performance issues or conduct behaviors. Otherwise, we'll go into pure management then. So it's about deciding as a leader, as a manager, what hat do I need to wear today? Do I put on my directive hat because somebody's new in the job and they need a little bit more direction, or somebody's not performing, so they need a bit more direction? Or do we take much more of that coaching approach and that much more of that supporting approach? And we do that through listening deeply, as we've said, meaning that the questions that we ask We listen to the answers, and then we build our question base around what's been shared. We're not coming in when we do our performance evaluations with a set, 10 or 12 questions that we want to ask, and we ask everybody the same questions. We want to be having a different conversation, a meaningful conversation that does appreciate and accept individual needs, but also seeks contribution and ideas from others. But it allows the individual to seek more understanding about themselves, meaning we need to be interested in what's happening, not just in their world at work, but what's happening within their wider world. And be conscious how often we are communicating. Now, when we're up against it, we are going to go into much more of a telling mode because we just want to get the job done. But in the long term, if you're wanting to build healthy teams and teams that feel that they are valuable and that they're being listened to and heard and all of those things, then a coaching approach through conscious communication is the way. So listening, questioning, not asking why, asking what, where, when, tell me how. So we don't want to be asking why when we're in a coaching conversation, because if we ask why, we're going to get somebody to justify their reasoning. And why, to be quite honest, is a very lazy question, and a question that is just kind of, you don't have to think about it. So why did you do that? Whereas if we're to say, well, tell me a little bit more about the decision making. What prompted you to make that decision? You get a whole different answer than you would do, then why did you make that decision? So as a leader, as a manager, really think about how you are positioning your questions. How are you asking your questions? Notice if you're giving them just a yes or a no answer. Do you think this will work? Well, you're only going to get yes or no, right? So why not say instead, tell me the reasons behind your thinking here, or tell me what do you think you can accomplish by taking this approach? Yes, they're longer questions than why, but you're going to get a different answer and a more engaged employee. So we want to coach, not manage. And think about, what hat do I wear? Because there will be times as a manager, as a leader, you might do some mentoring, but there's also going to be times when you will delegate and all of those things. And so even when you're thinking about delegating, you want to make sure that you're still taking a coaching approach to that delegation. You're not going into that traditional micromanage because you don't really trust the individual. Because the only reason why we micromanage anybody is because we don't really deep down trust. We think we can do the job better, or we think that they should be doing it in the way that we do it. But with millennials and Gen Zs, that's not going to work. They're going to want to do it in their own way and find their own answer. And so you've got to, in many ways, give somebody the space to explore and to try and figure things out themselves. That doesn't mean to say that you can't give them direction and support them, but you need to do it through that coaching way, which is to help them. So Stephen Covey was a leadership guru. He's written obviously so many different books around leadership. The 7 Habits, so 7 Habits is 6 Habits is one of them. But for me, he says in his book there, he says, seek first to understand before seeking to be understood. And I think if you can remember that quote, seek first to understand before seeking to be understood, it will help you with your Gen Zs and millennials, because they want to contribute. They want to share ideas. They want to be part of the decision-making process. And I know that's not always available for everybody, but as much as you can, it's worth a consideration. And then finally, help them make meaning. Engage with them around a conversation around their values. What are their core values? Yes, we have the organizational values, but what actually is driving them? What are their values? And actually the importance, what's sitting behind the words? And help them understand, make meaning. And that will help you be a better leader and a better manager. Understand their belief systems. What do they believe in? You might not agree with it, but still understand their beliefs, understand their strengths, what they can bring to the table. And let's see, can we utilize those strengths even more? For those who are familiar with StrengthsFinder or the Gallup organization, they've written so many books around strengths approaches. And Marcus Buckingham, First Break All the Rules, is about, forget about working on your weaknesses, because your weaknesses will always be your weaknesses. So through a coaching approach, let's see how we can enhance your strengths. And then let's look at your colleagues in your team, whether that's a multi-generational team or just a team of Gen Zs and Millennials. It doesn't really matter. But let's look at the strengths. Let's look at the scope of the strengths on the table here within this team. And let's see how we can apply those strengths to the tasks and to the responsibilities that we have within our team, our division, for our organization. And it's a much interesting and far better way to work. Let's connect with them. Let's help them. Let's understand their passions, their aspirations. You know, years ago, baby boomers would talk about ambition, but now it's aspirations. The word's different. And aspirations might mean something different than ambition to a Gen Z or to a millennial. And then motivational routes. What's really driving them? What is really their agenda? What's really going on for them underneath the surface? Hence, we need to listen at a deeper level to be able to get a more meaningful conversation to help them make meaning. So I'm going to pause there for a moment. I'm just going to stop sharing. I just wondered if you had any questions.
Brilliant. Well, thank you, Gillian, for that. And I know I know some of the things that you've mentioned has actually really resonated, and actually that three-dimensional leader element, really interesting. And actually I've been holding a sort of a couple of round tables over the last year or so, and actually one of the HR professionals who I partner with, she said, you know, for us as leaders, and even from sort of an HR element, we need to adapt our style in order to sort of support those within the organization. So we can't assume that they'll be tailoring to us. We actually need to tailor who we are and our ways of working to them. And interestingly, it says something that you've literally just mentioned. It was in regards to sort of looking at your strengths and actually how we need to support those strengths rather than sort of focusing on the weaknesses. And actually Coco, who recently won the US Women's Open, her dad said, in sort of a follow-up interview, he said, well, why would I hire a maths tutor when that was her weakness? Instead, I hired a tennis coach. And then she went on to obviously win the US Open. So really interesting points there. I know a couple of people have asked about whether we will be sharing the slides.
Yeah, I'll send them on. You can set them out. That's no problem.
Yeah, so we're more than happy to sort of send that. Okay, so one of the questions that we've had coming through is, I feel older Gen Xers might find it difficult to adapt their managerial style. How do you overcome this?
Really good question. And I think definitely Gen X, you know, I think I've been quite lucky because I've been coaching for 20 years. I think it's been easier for me to adapt. I think if we're very set in our traditional ways of leadership and management, which is much more of the directing and the guiding in a sense, then I think we have to look at, realistically, the question we have to look at is this the best way to lead and manage this particular person or this particular team or this team? And I think we have to take some responsibility ourselves. It's not to say that you're leading in a bad way, but what it's to say is there a different way? And my view is actually to get to know each and every team member and be a bit more of a chameleon in your leadership. So yes, with the trust thing I mentioned about being consistent, but everybody likes to be managed and led in a different way. And so my view is if you can get to know your individuals well enough through that more meaningful conversation, through their values, their beliefs, the three-dimensional approach of leadership, then I believe that we can have a different conversation, which will help you and them understand each other better. And I think once there's a common understanding, you can lead and manage in a different way because you know what makes them tick, you know what drives them, what motivates them. But it does require a bit of an effort up front, to make the time to do it.
Yeah, of course. One question that we've had come through, and actually it's switching it around, you know, should Gen Z/millennials be expected to change or adapt their working styles towards older generations within the organization as well?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one. I believe, yes, I think there should be a coming together. I would love to see much more of that holistic approach of coming together. I think the challenge is that most probably the baby boomers, the oldest generation that we've been talking about today, you know, there's such a difference in terms of technology awareness. So if I look at my son, who's a Gen Z, and I look at my mum and dad, who are grandparents, there's such a different connection. However, what I think is if you can have respect as a value within the team, actually to respect the diversity. And yes, they might not be able to communicate on the same level. They might not be on social media. They might not know all the jargon of what's going on for Gen Z, but it doesn't mean to say they should be put out to pasture. And I think that's what we've got to do, is to create an environment where there's respect and there is a commonality and an understanding that everybody has something to contribute in the team. And so I think there should be absolutely a coming together, but that requires the leader to really make that clear about expectations in the team.
Definitely. Do you have any suggestions in regards to incentives that could appeal to Gen Zs?
Yeah, so anything like well-being days. They love a well-being day, and I mean that with great respect, but they love a well-being day. Money, actually interesting, is not up there on their kind of biggest drivers. It's opportunity, diversifying within their learning. So training, giving them a budget for training every year, an extra day's holiday, those types of benefits would be really beneficial. And wellbeing days are really good. So for example, I've just got a friend who's setting up a whole new policy for Virgin at the moment, and they're specifically looking at benefits for Gen Zs. And so I know that's something that's certainly what some organizations are looking at already. Yeah,
definitely. And actually, following on from that, are you able to give any sort of real life examples in regards to a conversation that you've had with Gen Zs around this?
Yeah, so I think, well, it's interesting because I do a lot of coaching with Gen Zs, especially when they're new in their role and they're kind of onboarding. So I've done quite a fair bit of that recently. What's interesting, I think, is that they're very keen to learn and they're very keen to do a good job. But the opposite of that is that they easily get bored and they want fresh challenges all the time. And I think there's something I would say around helping, especially those who are new to an organization or you're onboarding people into particular, is to understand. So what I would say is most probably clearly help them with what their career path might look like right from the outset. So give them guidance, give them an understanding. Well, look, this is where you are now. I mean, I've had so many Gen Zs say, 3 weeks in, okay, but I'm thinking about my next move. And you're like, well, you're only 3 weeks in. Is it not better? Let's look at how we can really make you successful in this before we start moving on to the next thing. But yes, but I need to see clearly where I'm going if I'm going to stay with this organization. And so there's a lot of that. The other thing is that they're very keen on doing, out of work activity. So greater good work, philanthropy work, so if there's opportunity to get them involved in other projects like charities or, sponsorship type of things where they can get engaged, where they're going to be giving something back, they're very keen to be involved in that as well. I don't think I answered that question fully, but hopefully that helped a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. So someone's reached out and they said, "Hi, Gillian, I'm a hypnotherapist working in the recruitment industry on mental health. It's a tough industry, as you know, the nature of success in this industry is demanding. Do you have any tips for aggressive and stressful sales teams and the conflict between hard work and results?"
Such a very good question. In fact, I was talking to somebody yesterday about this. Actually, I was coaching somebody yesterday about this. I think it's really interesting. Well, I think it's hard is the first answer I'm going to give, because I think in an industry that is renowned for getting the results from a sales perspective, it is difficult sometimes to then even take your foot off the gas to look at what else is going on, and what else can be offered in terms of managing or leading those younger generations. I think it's a cultural thing, and I don't know whether it can be. I don't think it's going to be solved overnight. I think an organization, a sales industry, sales teams, whatever, need to look at how do we get results, but how can we still motivate and engage in a different way? And I think that requires most probably millennials and Gen Zs coming in as leaders and managers of those teams to look at new ways of doing it. So, if there was an opportunity to look at that change, I would put a work task team together and have a mixture of different people within the organization, but we have quite a lot of Gen Zs and millennials in that task group to discuss that in more detail.
Yeah, definitely. I am conscious of timing because we have had quite a few questions that have come through. So hopefully I'll be able to sort of answer, or you'll be able to answer as many as possible. So someone has said, you talked about Gallup earlier, focusing on strengths. Is there any information or structure that you can support with your conversations?
Yeah, so there's a really good I can put this on there's 4 questions basically. And so maybe, I don't know, Elspeth, you can maybe type it as and put it in the chat box, something like that. But the way that I would so there's 4 questions that I would always ask, which is basically, and I would give them to do this as a piece of homework for a team meeting or an individual one-on-one or whatever you have with them. But what you get the best of me when, and this comes from Strength Finder actually in Gallup. So you get the best of me when, you get the worst of me when, this is what I need from you, and this is what you can expect from me. So if you
had to test my old touch typing there.
Sorry.
There we go.
Yeah. So the idea is that if you do, say, for example, you're having a team meeting, or you take your team away, you're having a team development day or something like that, or even you're getting individuals when they join the team, it's a really good tool to use. And it's part of the Strength Finder kind of activities that you do with teams. I'm a strengths coach with Gallup. It's really, really good. And I would suggest that, I use that all the time, and it gets you to break down barriers. And if you can then share that, everybody can share that with a wider team, it means that, again, there's that common understanding and we're making meaning of how we work and what we need.
Yeah, definitely. So another question, looking for organizations with financial stability that take care of well-being are ethically led. I think that's just sort of like a general point there. And then someone else has said, I manage talent acquisition in a city law firm. I would really appreciate on selling Gen Z to hiring managers. There can be some resistance to hiring people with short attention spans, sort of inverted commas, and who are demanding more from their employers than other generations that tend to. And actually, I think that's a really good question to ask, because I'm sure it's not just this person, it's actually quite a common trend that I know with my network that I've been engaging with also. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously, you've got lots of people coming through university who are Gen Zs who, are training to be legal professionals. And I think, just as an example, because you're part of the legal community, I think it's a really difficult one. I think it's about a mindset shift and a mindset change. And I think it's about, how do we choose to lead and manage these people? I've done a lot of work with professional services firms, law in particular, and I know there's not a lot of time to lead and manage because there's a lot of things that need to get done. But it does require a new change in leadership if you're going to be recruiting Gen Zs. Because although I've said I would like people to come together a bit more harmonized, a little bit more holistically work together in that way, I do think we have to understand the kind of work that they're able to do, which is they're intelligent, they're quick to learn. Yeah. So again, we don't need to rule out that just because they might be a bit more demanding doesn't mean to say that they're not going to be good at their job and can't offer and contribute well to an organization. What we've just got to look at is how are we going to lead them? And I think it's an organizational question, which is around what culture do we want to have within our business, and how do we want to lead our people? Yeah, definitely. Okay. Hopefully can try and squeeze through 2 more questions. Yeah, sure. So one of them says, with boomer shareholders still really caring about what is profit, will the additional time spent getting to know the Gen Z people an additional squeeze to mid-management? How do we look after mid-managers during this transition phase in our work landscape? I think mid-managers need coaching and development. Yeah. I think there's skills that can be learned and taught. And I think there's individual coaching to help people overcome their own challenges, or even just to talk more around developing and understanding what they might need to do, but also how they can learn about their communication style. So I think it's about bringing awareness into that middle management arena. And I think through coaching, through team development, or team coach, I would think I'm a coach, I'm going to sell coaching more than anything else. But I do believe, because it's so bespoke,
that it can actually get greater results than just pure training. So I think there's something there. Think about how you can integrate that more kind of coaching style conversation, or actually getting them coached, or getting them some team coaching to support that dialogue and that learning and understanding.
Definitely. Okay, one very last question. In multi-generational teams, there may be a Gen X employees who are being managed by Gen Y employees. Do you think it is hard for Gen Y to understand Gen X, or vice versa?
Good question. I think like all of us, we all have our own biases, right? So I'm Gen X. So I think if I didn't have my awareness of coaching, and again, I don't get it right all the time, certainly not perfect. I think we can easily fall back on what we're familiar with and what we know. Yeah. So what have we done? And so therefore, what we can easily do, any generation can, is we compare and contrast, because we're human beings. So I think when we compare and contrast, then that's where we can start, things can get a little bit more conflicting, or a little bit more sticky or challenging. And my view would be is actually to leave our biases at the door. Easier said than done. And actually be prepared to come out of your comfort zone and actually say to them, you know what, I didn't manage that situation in the best way there. I could have done it differently. And I'm willing to learn. And I think that takes, that's brave, that's bold, that's courageous to show vulnerability in an organizational context, because many leaders and managers don't. Mm-hmm. And I think if we can have that different dialogue, which say, this is a learning environment, I'm not going to get it right all the time. I might influence in the way that I believe it should be done. But if it doesn't work out, then actually let's do a debrief, let's unpack it, and let's see what I could have done differently. So I think it's all about this give and take, and it's about open communication. And I do think it's difficult, but it's something that can be mastered with time and effort, and actually a commitment to be accepting of each other.
Yeah, definitely. Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Gillian, for today. Really appreciate you joining us. And again, I'll follow up afterwards, and I'll share sort of the slides. And thank you so much to everyone who joined us. Really appreciate it as well. And hopefully we will see you all in the next one. And as I said, Gillian is available for coaching sessions. So again, I will share her details that you can reach out to her. And vice versa, if you ever require any support from a recruitment perspective, then please do reach out to myself. I've been more than happy to sort of have that confidential conversation as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. Hope you have a good rest of the day. Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye.